In the sweltering heat of the year 258 AD, deep within the sprawling dominion of the Roman Empire, a harrowing scene unfolded. A young man, barely past his prime, was subjected to a torment of unimaginable cruelty, slowly roasted alive on a metal gridiron suspended over an open flame. As the ravenous flames licked at his flesh and the searing iron branded his skin, incredulous witnesses reported an event that seemed to defy the very laws of nature and human comprehension. He smiled, and even more shockingly, as his tormentors, driven by a perverse desire to break him, intensified the heat, they were met not with the agonizing screams they anticipated, but instead with words that would resonate through the corridors of history. "Turn me over. I'm done on this side." This wasn't the product of madness or the hallucinatory haze of delirium. This was St. Lawrence, a Christian deacon whose gruesome demise stands as one of the most compelling testaments to the enduring power of faith to triumph over the most barbarous tortures the ancient world could conceive. But the narrative of Lawrence's martyrdom is more than just another somber chronicle of religious persecution. It is a revealing lens through which to examine the intricate interplay of power, faith, and the sheer resilience of the human spirit within an empire where death had been transformed into a public spectacle and where the most unspeakable punishments were reserved for those who dared to challenge the iron grip of the established order. His execution was meticulously designed, not simply to extinguish a life, but to shatter the spirit of an entire religious community through the calculated display of unimaginable suffering. What renders Lawrence's story particularly chilling is not solely the excruciating method of his execution, but the insidious psychological warfare meticulously woven into its fabric. The Roman authorities, masters of manipulation and control, understood that the manner of one's death could either galvanize or terrorize. They strategically selected the gridiron, a tool of slow, deliberate burning, designed to maximize both physical agony and public humiliation, confident that it would serve as a stark demonstration of the futility of Christian resistance. Yet something profound went awry with their carefully constructed spectacle of imperial power. Instead of witnessing the expected collapse of faith under extreme duress, the assembled crowd bore witness to a phenomenon that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of human nature and the potential for divine intervention. The man who, by all rights, should have been consumed by screams of agony, was instead speaking with unwavering clarity, even humor, as if the raging flames were little more than an irritating inconvenience. The historical record, meticulously compiled by early church historians such as Prudentius and subsequently corroborated by esteemed scholars like St. Ambrose, paints a vivid picture not only of Lawrence's final moments, but also of the meticulously calculated cruelty that preceded them. This was no spontaneous outburst of violence. It was a deliberate campaign orchestrated to systematically strip the burgeoning Christian church of its resources, its leadership, and ultimately, its very hope. To fully appreciate the magnitude of what befell Lawrence, we must embark on a journey back to the sun-drenched hills of his native Hispania, traverse the hallowed corridors of papal power in Rome, and delve into the mind of an emperor whose persecution of Christians would become infamous for its cold, systematic brutality. Only then can we begin to comprehend why the death of this young deacon resonated with such profound power that it ultimately played a role in transforming the very empire that sought his destruction. The Roman Empire in the year 258 AD was an entity stretched to its breaking point, groaning under the weight of its own vastness and internal contradictions. Emperor Valerian, perched atop the precarious throne, ruled over territories that stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-baked lands along the Euphrates River. But his grip on power was becoming increasingly tenuous. Rampant economic inflation ravaged the provinces, plunging countless citizens into destitution. Barbarian tribes, emboldened by Roman weakness, pressed relentlessly against the borders, testing the limits of the empire's defenses. And, perhaps most troubling of all, for those who clung to traditional Roman values, foreign religions were spreading with alarming speed among both the enslaved and the freeborn. Christianity in particular had evolved from a small, marginalized Jewish sect into a formidable force that threatened to undermine the very foundations of Roman religious and social order. Valerian's approach to the perceived Christian problem marked a significant departure from the policies of his predecessors. While earlier emperors had engaged in sporadic, often localized persecutions, Valerian implemented what historians now recognize as the first systematic empire-wide campaign of religious genocide. His infamous edicts of 257 and 258 AD were not blunt instruments of indiscriminate violence, but rather precise tools of terror, carefully targeting not all Christians, but specifically the clergy and the wealthy believers who constituted the very backbone of the rapidly expanding church infrastructure. The emperor's strategy was chillingly logical. Rather than squandering precious resources on the mass executions of common believers, he would effectively decapitate the Christian movement by eliminating its leadership and confiscating its accumulated wealth. Bishops, presbyters, and deacons were ordered to participate in traditional Roman religious ceremonies and publicly offer sacrifices to the Roman gods or face immediate execution. Christian cemeteries, considered sacred ground, were sealed and desecrated. Religious assemblies were forbidden under the threat of death, and Christian nobles faced the devastating loss of their property, status, and even their lives. Rome itself had become a veritable powder keg of religious tension, a city simmering with fear, suspicion, and resentment. The Christian community, estimated by modern historians to comprise perhaps 10% of the city's burgeoning population, had become increasingly visible and organized, a defiant presence in the heart of the empire. They operated extensive charitable networks that provided for the poor and marginalized, maintained clandestine underground burial sites where they honored their dead, and, most provocatively, steadfastly refused to participate in the imperial cult that served as the spiritual glue binding the diverse empire together. Their refusal to offer even a pinch of incense to the emperor's image was perceived not merely as a matter of religious defiance, but as an act of treason against the very state itself. The papacy under Sixtus II epitomized everything that Valerian feared about the growing power and organizational prowess of the Christian movement. Far from being a loosely connected collection of individual believers, the Roman Church had developed sophisticated administrative structures, amassed significant wealth through the generous donations of its members, and maintained an extensive network of communication and support that stretched across the known world. The papal treasury, meticulously managed by trusted deacons like Lawrence, funded not only local Christian activities within the city of Rome, but also provided crucial support to struggling Christian communities in far-flung corners of the empire. It was into this environment of extreme volatility and escalating persecution that Lawrence had risen to a position of prominence as the chief deacon of Rome, effectively the papal treasurer and one of the most influential figures within the Christian hierarchy. His elevated position made him both a highly valuable target for Roman authorities eager to seize the church's considerable wealth and a potent symbol of Christian resistance to the overreaching authority of the empire. The stage was thus set for a cataclysmic confrontation that would test the very limits of both Roman cruelty and the unwavering strength of Christian faith. Lawrence's remarkable journey from the rugged hills of Hispania to the opulent corridors of papal power in Rome reads like a classic tale of ancient success, a testament to his extraordinary talents and unwavering dedication. Yet, it was precisely this very success that would ultimately seal his tragic fate. Born around 225 AD in what is now northeastern Spain, Lawrence was raised in a region where Roman culture had intermingled with deeply rooted local traditions, giving rise to a uniquely vibrant and dynamic Christian community. The church in Hispania had a well-deserved reputation for producing exceptional scholars and administrators, individuals who possessed a rare combination of profound theological knowledge and keen practical organizational skills. The young Lawrence quickly caught the attention of influential church leaders, not because of any reported mystical visions or miraculous healings, but because of his remarkable ability to effectively manage both people and resources. When the future Pope Sixtus II encountered him during a visit to Spain, he immediately recognized in Lawrence the kind of administrative acumen and unwavering dedication that the rapidly growing Roman Church desperately needed. The papal invitation to Rome represented both an extraordinary opportunity for the ambitious young deacon and an equally extraordinary risk, a leap of faith into the very heart of the empire that was increasingly hostile to his beliefs. Rome in the 250s was a city of stark contrasts for Christians, a place where moments of relative peace and tolerance coexisted with the ever-present threat of sudden and brutal persecution. On the surface, Christians enjoyed periods of normalcy, conducting their businesses, raising their families, and even holding positions of minor authority within the Roman bureaucracy. Yet, beneath this veneer of apparent normalcy lurked the constant threat of persecution. A sudden shift in imperial policy, a localized scandal involving Christians, or even simply the spread of a malicious rumor could instantly transform peaceful citizens into hunted criminals overnight. For a young man hailing from the provinces, navigating this treacherous environment required exceptional skill, unwavering courage, and a deep understanding of the complex dynamics of Roman society. Lawrence's meteoric rise within the Roman Church hierarchy speaks volumes about both his exceptional talents and the increasingly urgent needs of the burgeoning Christian community. As chief deacon, he was entrusted with the weighty responsibility of managing the church's vast finances, coordinating its extensive charitable activities, and maintaining the complex network of relationships that kept the sprawling Christian community functioning as a cohesive unit. This meant that he knew not only the precise locations where the church's precious treasures were hidden from prying eyes, but also the names, addresses, and personal circumstances of countless Christians throughout the vast city, information that would ultimately prove invaluable to the Roman authorities seeking to crush the Christian movement. The role of chief deacon in the 3rd century church was far more significant and multifaceted than modern readers might initially imagine. Lawrence wasn't simply keeping the church's books and balancing its accounts. He was effectively managing what amounted to an alternative social welfare system, providing a vital safety net for the most vulnerable members of Roman society. The Roman Church, through the tireless efforts of Lawrence and his fellow deacons, fed thousands of impoverished individuals on a daily basis, provided crucial support to widows and orphans struggling to survive, ransomed Christian prisoners unjustly imprisoned by Roman authorities, and provided dignified burial services for those who couldn't afford them, ensuring that even in death, their dignity was preserved. This extensive and well-organized charitable network had undoubtedly made Christianity increasingly attractive to many Romans, but it had also made the church wealthy and therefore increasingly dangerous in the eyes of a suspicious Roman state. By 258 AD, Lawrence had become one of the most recognizable and respected faces of Roman Christianity, a figure known for his unwavering integrity, his compassionate heart, and his remarkable administrative skills. His prominent position required him to interact regularly with both Christian and pagan citizens, making him a vital bridge between two worlds that were increasingly at odds with each other. He possessed a deep understanding of Roman culture and law, spoke fluent Latin and Greek, and possessed the sophisticated social skills necessary to navigate the complex and often treacherous political environment of the imperial capital. Tragically, these very qualities that made him so effective in his vital role would also make his eventual torture and death all the more shocking and impactful to those who witnessed it. The sudden and unexpected arrest of Pope Sixtus II on August 6, 258 AD, sent shockwaves of fear and uncertainty throughout the Christian community of Rome, shattering their sense of security and plunging them into a state of crisis. Roman soldiers, acting on direct orders from the increasingly paranoid Emperor Valerian, stormed into the underground cemetery of San Callisto while Sixtus was leading a Christian service, seizing the Pope and several of his deacons. The timing of the raid was deliberately chosen to maximize its impact. By catching the Christian leadership gathered together in blatant violation of imperial edicts, the Roman authorities had effectively provided themselves with the legal justification for the brutal actions that would soon follow. Within a matter of hours, Sixtus and his captured companions were summarily executed, their deaths serving as both a brutal punishment for their defiance and a chilling warning to the remaining Christians. Lawrence, who, by a stroke of fate, had not been present at the fatal gathering, now found himself thrust into the unenviable position of being the highest-ranking Christian official still alive and at liberty in Rome. The crushing weight of this newfound responsibility threatened to overwhelm him. Thousands of Roman Christians, now leaderless and fearful, looked to him for guidance and reassurance, while the ruthless Roman authorities simultaneously viewed him as the key to dismantling what remained of the church's once thriving infrastructure. His position made him simultaneously the most important and the most hunted man in the Christian community, a precarious situation fraught with peril. The Roman prefect, acting under Valerian's specific instructions regarding the seizure of church property, summoned Lawrence to his official residence for interrogation. The meeting, however, was less an outright arrest and more of a carefully orchestrated negotiation. Roman law, with its intricate complexities, required a certain degree of cooperation for the legal confiscation of property, and the Roman authorities desperately needed Lawrence's assistance to identify and seize the church's assets in a manner that would at least appear to be lawful. The prefect, attempting to appear reasonable, offered Lawrence what seemed like a tantalizing bargain: surrender the church's hidden treasures, and Lawrence might very well escape with his life. What followed was a tense and carefully worded conversation that served to reveal the fundamental and irreconcilable differences between the Roman and Christian worldviews, a clash of values that would ultimately lead to Lawrence's agonizing death. The prefect, thinking solely in terms of gold, silver, and precious stones, demanded to know the location of the church's vast wealth. Lawrence, however, understanding the concept of treasure in entirely different terms, cleverly asked for 3 days to gather together what the church valued most. The Romans, misinterpreting this request as a sign of genuine cooperation, eagerly granted his request, failing to realize that they had been skillfully outmaneuvered by a man who was about to turn their carefully laid plans completely upside down. During those 3 crucial days, Lawrence worked tirelessly and frantically to distribute the church's material wealth to the poor and needy, selling valuable items to provide much-needed provisions for struggling Christian families, and arranging for the safety and concealment of as many believers as possible, knowing that the Roman authorities would soon be hunting them down. He understood that his time was severely limited and that his actions during these final days would ultimately determine not only his own personal fate, but also the future of Christianity in Rome. Every decision he made carried enormous consequences for the countless people who depended on the church for their very survival. The psychological pressure that Lawrence must have endured during this period must have been absolutely immense. A crushing weight of responsibility and the agonizing knowledge that his choices would have life or death consequences for so many. Lawrence knew that accepting the Roman offer meant betraying everything he believed in, abandoning the poor and vulnerable to the whims of a ruthless empire, while refusing meant certain death under circumstances designed to inflict maximum suffering and public humiliation. Yet remarkably, historical accounts suggest that he approached this impossible choice with unwavering clarity of mind, even displaying a surprising sense of humor in the face of impending doom. He seemed to possess an almost preternatural understanding that his death could potentially accomplish far more than his life ever could, a profound calculation that would ultimately prove prophetic in ways that neither he nor his captors could have possibly imagined. The ultimate mockery of Roman authority. On August 10, 258 AD, Lawrence returned to the prefect as he had promised, but what he brought with him shattered every Roman expectation and sent shockwaves of disbelief through the gathered officials. Instead of chests overflowing with gold, silver, and precious jewels, he arrived accompanied by a throng of hundreds of the city's poorest and most marginalized residents, the blind, the lame, the widowed, and the orphaned. These were the very people whom the Roman Church had faithfully supported through its extensive charitable works, individuals who represented the very bottom rung of the Roman imperial society's rigid hierarchy. As the utterly dumbfounded prefect looked on in stunned silence, Lawrence gestured towards this assembly of human misery and declared, with unwavering conviction, "These are the treasures of the Church." The sheer audacity of this gesture cannot be overstated. In a society where wealth was equated with power and poverty was seen as a sign of inherent shame and worthlessness, Lawrence had effectively declared that Rome's most fundamental values were completely inverted. The people whom Romans considered to be utterly worthless slaves, beggars, social outcasts were, in the Christian understanding, the most valuable treasures on earth, worthy of the utmost care and protection. This wasn't merely a symbolic act of religious defiance. It was a direct and profound challenge to the entire imperial worldview, a rejection of the Roman system of values that place power and material wealth above all else. The prefect's initial confusion quickly gave way to a blinding rage, a fury born of humiliation and the realization that he had been skillfully manipulated. What had begun as a seemingly straightforward attempt at property confiscation had rapidly devolved into a public humiliation of the Roman authorities. Roman officials were accustomed to deference, fear, and absolute submission from those they interrogated, but instead they were confronted with a man who appeared to be utterly unconcerned with their power and who had transformed their demands into an opportunity for a public display of mockery. The carefully structured legal process that Valerian had established was now deemed secondary to the urgent need to reassert Roman authority and to punish this insolent Christian who had dared to challenge the might of the empire. The decision to execute Lawrence by slowly roasting him alive on a gridiron was not a spontaneous act of cruelty, but a carefully calculated act of psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of the Christian community and to deter others from following his example. The Romans, masters of propaganda and public image, fully understood the power of spectacle, and public executions served multiple purposes within their society: as a form of brutal punishment for the condemned criminal, as a stark deterrent to potential criminals who might be tempted to challenge the established order, and as a source of morbid entertainment for the masses, a constant reminder of the power of the Roman state. The method chosen for Lawrence's execution was specifically designed to be slow enough to inflict maximum suffering, public enough to have maximum impact on the gathered crowds, and brutal enough to discourage any thoughts of Christian heroism or resistance. The gridiron itself was a masterpiece of engineered torture, a testament to Roman ingenuity in the art of inflicting pain. Constructed of heavy iron bars arranged in a grid pattern, it was carefully designed to distribute heat evenly across the victim's body while simultaneously preventing a swift death. The unfortunate victim would be securely tied to the metal framework and positioned directly over a carefully maintained fire, allowing for a slow, controlled roasting process that could be prolonged for hours, maximizing the victim's agony. The heat would be intense enough to cause excruciating pain, searing the flesh and causing unimaginable suffering, but carefully regulated to prevent immediate death from shock or smoke inhalation, ensuring that the victim remained conscious for as long as possible. Roman executioners were skilled professionals who possessed a thorough understanding of human anatomy and the mechanics of death. They knew precisely how to maintain the fire at the right temperature to maximize suffering while ensuring that the victim remained conscious and aware of their surroundings. The positioning of the body on the gridiron, the precise timing of each agonizing turn, the careful management of the flames, all of these elements were meticulously calculated to create a public spectacle that would burn itself into the collective memory of every witness, Christian and pagan alike. The execution ground quickly filled with spectators as word spread throughout Rome that the infamous Christian deacon would be publicly tortured to death in a manner that was as gruesome as it was unusual. The assembled crowd represented a diverse cross-section of imperial society, Roman citizens seeking a source of morbid entertainment, Christians gathering to offer prayers for their courageous leader, imperial officials ensuring that the emperor's will was carried out, and curious foreigners drawn by the allure of the macabre spectacle. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, fear, and a barely contained sense of violence. Lawrence was brought forward in chains, but contemporary accounts consistently emphasize his remarkable composure rather than any signs of terror or desperation. Roman executioners were experts at reading the faces of condemned men, and they typically encountered one of two predictable responses: either a complete psychological collapse into a state of abject terror or desperate attempts at bravado that quickly crumbled under the first stages of torture. Lawrence, however, presented something entirely different, a calm demeanor that seemed genuine rather than forced, as if he were approaching a routine appointment rather than an agonizing execution. The gridiron had been meticulously prepared with characteristic Roman efficiency, a testament to their dedication to the art of inflicting pain. The iron bars glowed with an ominous heat, positioned at precisely the right height above carefully arranged coals, ensuring a slow and agonizing death. The executioners had carefully tested the temperature, ensuring that it would be hot enough to cause immediate and intense pain, but not so hot as to cause a rapid death that would deprive the spectators of the spectacle they had come to witness. This was science applied to suffering, technology in service of terror, engineering specifically designed to break the human spirit. As Lawrence was stripped naked and bound to the unforgiving metal framework, the crowd grew hushed, their collective breath held in morbid anticipation. This was the moment when condemned men typically began screaming in terror, begging for mercy from their captors, or calling upon their gods for deliverance from their impending doom. The profound silence that followed was far more unsettling than any outburst of screams would have been. Instead of the expected cries of agony, witnesses heard something that defied comprehension, something that would challenge the very foundations of their understanding of human nature. Lawrence began to speak, not in desperation or pleading, but with what sounded remarkably like a casual conversation. The physical reality of what was happening to Lawrence's body was horrific beyond description, a torment that no human being should ever have to endure. Human skin begins to burn at temperatures around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and the gridiron was undoubtedly far hotter than that. The searing iron bars were branding his flesh wherever they made contact, creating geometric patterns of excruciating burns across his back and limbs, causing unimaginable pain. The sickening smell of burning flesh filled the air, a sickly sweet odor that made even the most hardened and experienced Roman soldiers uncomfortable. Yet, something was profoundly wrong with the carefully orchestrated spectacle. The man who should have been screaming in agony was instead speaking with apparent clarity, his voice strong and unwavering. The victim who should have been begging for mercy was instead engaging in what witnesses later described as theological discourse, discussing matters of faith with an apparent lack of concern for his own suffering. The Christian who should have been cursing his God for abandoning him was instead praising him and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to demonstrate his unwavering faith. The Roman machinery of terror, honed to perfection over centuries of use, was encountering something it had never faced before, a victim who refused to be victimized. As the flames intensified and the iron bars grew hotter, Lawrence's response became even more inexplicable, even more disconcerting to his captors. Instead of succumbing to the anticipated psychological breakdown, he began what witnesses described as a sustained conversation with his executioners, speaking with a clarity that suggested complete mental coherence despite the unimaginable physical trauma his body was enduring. Roman officials, trained to recognize the stages of torture-induced psychological collapse, found themselves dealing with something entirely outside their realm of experience, a phenomenon that defied their understanding of human behavior. The most famous and enduring of Lawrence's statements during his horrific torture has echoed through the centuries, a testament to his unwavering spirit and his ability to find humor even in the face of unimaginable suffering. Assum est, versa et manduca. I am cooked on this side. Turn me over and eat. The Latin phrase, carefully recorded by multiple witnesses, reveals not delirium or madness, but sophisticated wordplay and a profound sense of defiance. Lawrence was making a macabre pun, comparing himself to a piece of meat being prepared for a feast, while simultaneously mocking his executioner's inability to break his spirit or to shake his unwavering faith. This wasn't the desperate, rambling humor of a man losing his sanity. It was calculated defiance cleverly wrapped in wit, a final act of resistance against the forces of oppression. The psychological impact on the executioners was immediate and profound, shaking them to their very core. These were men accustomed to the screams of agony, the desperate pleas for mercy, and the eventual inevitable submission of their victims. Their expertise lay in understanding how torture affected the human mind and body, knowledge that made them effective instruments of imperial justice. Yet, here was a victim who seemed to be directing his own execution, offering unsolicited advice on technique while displaying no apparent distress about his circumstances, a complete inversion of the established power dynamic. The Roman spectators, who had come expecting an afternoon's entertainment in the form of Christian cowardice, instead witnessed something that challenged their understanding of human nature itself, something that forced them to question their most deeply held beliefs. The crowd grew increasingly restless, uncomfortable with a spectacle that wasn't unfolding according to the familiar patterns they had come to expect. Some began to murmur nervously about divine intervention, speculating that the Christian God might be protecting Lawrence from the flames. Others whispered about the possibility that Lawrence possessed supernatural powers that allowed him to withstand the unimaginable pain. Most unsettling of all for the Roman authorities, some began to question whether the Romans were, in fact, the villains in this particular drama, a dangerous sentiment that threatened to undermine the very foundations of imperial power. The executioners, following standard procedure, did indeed turn Lawrence over on the gridiron, but their actions now seemed to be driven more by Lawrence's suggestions than by their own volition, as if they were taking orders from their victim rather than controlling him. Each movement of the gridiron, each adjustment of the flames, appeared to be happening at Lawrence's suggestion rather than according to Roman design, a complete inversion of the expected power dynamic. The torturer-victim relationship had somehow been subverted, with the man being burned alive, seemingly becoming the dominant figure in his own execution, a truly bizarre and unsettling spectacle. Contemporary Christian writers recorded additional statements from Lawrence during his agonizing ordeal, including heartfelt prayers for the conversion of Rome itself and expressions of deep gratitude for being found worthy of martyrdom. Whether these accounts are entirely historically accurate or represent later embellishments added to enhance the legend of St. Lawrence, they point to something unprecedented in the annals of Roman executions. A victim who used his torture not as a reason for submission or despair, but as a platform for proclamation, as an opportunity to spread his message of faith and to inspire others to follow his example. The Roman crowd's reaction to Lawrence's execution represents one of the most thoroughly documented instances of mass psychological transformation in ancient history, a profound shift in public sentiment that would have far-reaching consequences for the future of the empire. What began as a typical display of imperial power, the public destruction of an enemy of the state, gradually became something else entirely, something that challenged the very foundations of Roman society. Spectators who had come expecting to witness Roman power triumphant over Christian weakness instead found themselves questioning everything they thought they understood about strength, weakness, and the very nature of victory itself. The diverse social composition of the crowd made their reaction particularly significant. These weren't Christian sympathizers or religious seekers already predisposed to question Roman authority. They were ordinary Roman citizens who had internalized imperial values and expectations, individuals who had grown up believing in the superiority of Roman civilization and the unquestionable authority of the emperor. They understood the purpose of public executions and their role as witnesses to imperial justice, reinforcing the power of the state. Yet, as Lawrence's torture continued without producing the expected results, their confidence in familiar categories began to erode, replaced by a growing sense of unease and uncertainty. Roman executions typically followed predictable patterns that audiences recognized and anticipated. The condemned would initially show some degree of defiance, then gradually break down under the relentless pressure of torture, eventually pleading for mercy or begging for a swift death. This progression served important social functions within Roman society. It demonstrated that Roman power was absolute and could overcome any resistance. It provided a form of cathartic entertainment for the masses, and it reinforced existing social hierarchies by showing what happened to those who dared to challenge authority. Lawrence's execution, however, was subverting all of these expectations, undermining the very foundations of Roman power. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder as witnesses struggled to make sense of what they were seeing, their faces etched with confusion and disbelief. Some invoked traditional Roman explanation, suggesting that perhaps Lawrence was under the influence of foreign magic, or that the gods were testing Roman resolve by allowing a Christian to withstand such unimaginable pain. Others began to whisper about the unsettling possibility that the Christian God might actually be more powerful than the Roman deities, a dangerous thought that threatened to undermine the entire Roman religious system. Most unsettling of all for the Roman authorities, some began to openly question whether the Romans were, in fact, the villains in this particular drama, a revolutionary sentiment that could potentially incite open rebellion against the empire. The transformation in public sentiment wasn't uniform or immediate. Different sections of the crowd reacted in different ways, creating distinct pockets of conversation, heated argument, and growing tension. Roman officials, experienced in crowd control, recognized the danger signs. Public executions that turned audiences against the executioners had historically led to riots, political upheaval, and even challenges to imperial authority, and they knew that they had to act quickly to regain control of the situation. What had begun as a carefully staged demonstration of Roman power was now threatening to become a demonstration of Roman powerlessness, a humiliation of the empire in the eyes of its own citizens. The pivotal moment that crystallized the crowd's transformation came when Lawrence, after enduring hours of unimaginable torture, somehow managed to raise his head and address not his executioners, but the Roman prefect himself, the very embodiment of Roman authority. According to multiple historical accounts, he thanked the official for the opportunity to demonstrate the strength of Christian faith and even offered prayers for the conversion of the entire Roman Empire, a final act of defiance, or perhaps of profound charity, that left even the hardened Roman officials stunned into an uncharacteristic silence. Lawrence's death, when it finally came, was as unexpected and as unconventional as everything else about his execution. After enduring hours of torture that should have reduced him to a broken wreck, he died, not with screams of agony or curses of resentment, but with what witnesses described as a prayer of thanksgiving on his lips, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to bear witness to his faith. The man who had defied every Roman expectation about human nature continued that defiance until his final breath, transforming even his death into an act of worship rather than a defeat. The immediate aftermath of the execution was marked by chaos and confusion. The crowd that had gathered for an afternoon's entertainment found itself grappling with an experience that fit no familiar categories, something that challenged their most deeply held beliefs. Roman officials, realizing that their carefully staged demonstration of power had somehow become a demonstration of Christian strength, moved quickly to disperse the spectators and control the narrative, attempting to spin the events in a way that would minimize the damage to the empire's reputation. But the damage was already done. Too many people had witnessed something that contradicted everything they had been taught about Roman superiority and Christian weakness. Within hours, stories about Lawrence's extraordinary execution were spreading throughout Rome with the speed that only truly shocking news can achieve, amplified by word of mouth and embellished with each retelling. The details often grew in the telling, becoming more fantastical and miraculous, but the central fact remained consistent. A Christian deacon had been tortured to death in the most horrific manner that Roman ingenuity could devise, and he had somehow managed to transform his torture into a triumph of faith. For a city accustomed to clear distinctions between victors and victims, the implications were profoundly unsettling, forcing them to question the very nature of power and the meaning of sacrifice. The Christian community's response to Lawrence's death was immediate and unprecedented, a testament to the profound impact he had had on their lives. Instead of being terrorized into submission as Valerian's persecution was designed to achieve, Roman Christians were galvanized by Lawrence's courageous example, inspired to resist the forces of oppression with even greater determination. The very brutality of his execution, combined with his extraordinary response to it, created a powerful symbol of Christian resistance that imperial authorities were powerless to suppress. The martyr they had created was proving far more dangerous in death than he had ever been alive, a beacon of hope in the darkness of persecution. Roman authorities quickly recognized their mistake, understanding that their attempt to intimidate the Christian community had backfired spectacularly. The execution that was supposed to demonstrate the futility of Christian resistance had instead provided Christians with their most powerful symbol of faith yet, an enduring example of courage and unwavering commitment. Lawrence's death was being interpreted not as evidence of Roman strength, but as proof of Christian victory over Roman power, a triumph of the spirit over the forces of oppression. The empire's most refined instruments of terror had been rendered impotent by one man's refusal to be terrorized, a devastating blow to Roman prestige. The practical consequences were immediate and far-reaching, reshaping the religious landscape of Rome. Christian converts, inspired by Lawrence's example, began openly declaring their faith despite the ongoing persecution, willing to risk their lives for their beliefs. The church's charitable networks, which Lawrence had died protecting, reconstituted themselves with new vigor and determination, continuing to provide aid to the poor and vulnerable. Most significantly, Romans themselves, even those who had no prior interest in Christianity, began asking searching questions about a religion that could produce such extraordinary courage in the face of such extraordinary suffering, a phenomenon that defied their understanding of human behavior. The execution had backfired completely, achieving the precise opposite of its intended effect. The martyrdom of St. Lawrence marked a pivotal turning point in the complex relationship between the Roman Empire and Christianity, A subtle but significant shift in the balance of power, though the full implications wouldn't become clear for several decades. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Emperor Valerian's persecution actually intensified as imperial authorities recognized that their standard methods of suppression were proving not only ineffective but actively counterproductive. Yet, this very escalation revealed the growing desperation of an empire struggling to maintain control over a religious movement that seemed to grow stronger with each attempt to destroy it, fueled by the blood of its martyrs. Within the Christian community, Lawrence's death quickly became the gold standard for martyrdom, the ultimate example of courage and unwavering faith in the face of unspeakable suffering. His unique combination of administrative competence, theological sophistication, and extraordinary courage under torture provided a powerful model that inspired generations of Christian leaders to come, shaping their understanding of faith and sacrifice. More importantly, his ability to transform torture into testimony gave Christians a new and profound understanding of how suffering could be redemptive rather than merely destructive, a concept that would become central to the Christian understanding of salvation. The church that emerged from Valerian's brutal persecution was stronger, more organized, and more confident than the one that had entered it, forged in the fires of adversity. The broader Roman society was equally transformed by Lawrence's death, though in ways that imperial authorities found deeply troubling. Lawrence's execution had been witnessed by hundreds of people from all walks of life, and they carried their testimony throughout the city and, eventually, throughout the empire. The story of the deacon who had mocked his torturers while being burned alive on a gridiron became a powerful tool for Christian evangelization, demonstrating to a skeptical world that Christian faith could provide strength beyond anything that Roman power could offer. The very spectacle designed to discourage Christian conversion was, ironically, instead encouraging it, planting the seeds of doubt in the minds of those who had previously unquestioningly accepted Roman authority. The theological implications of Lawrence's martyrdom resonated throughout the developing Christian doctrine of suffering and redemption, shaping the way Christians understood the meaning of pain and sacrifice. Early church fathers such as St. Ambrose and St. Augustine drew upon Lawrence's extraordinary example to develop sophisticated theological theories about how individual suffering could serve a larger cosmic purpose, transforming human pain into something meaningful and redemptive. Lawrence's death provided concrete evidence that Christian faith could transform even the most extreme suffering into something meaningful and ultimately beneficial, a concept that would become central to the Christian understanding of salvation and the path to eternal life. The political consequences of Lawrence's martyrdom were equally significant, subtly but surely shifting the balance of power between the empire and the church. Lawrence's execution demonstrated, perhaps for the first time, that Roman imperial power, despite its apparent omnipotence, had limits that even its own officials didn't fully understand. The empire's ability to control bodies was absolute, allowing them to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering, but its ability to control minds and spirits was proving remarkably fragile, susceptible to the influence of faith and the power of example. This dawning recognition would contribute to the eventual transformation of imperial policy toward Christianity, culminating in Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which granted religious tolerance to Christians and paved the way for the eventual Christianization of the Roman Empire. Perhaps most importantly, Lawrence's death established a new paradigm for understanding the complex relationship between temporal and spiritual power, demonstrating that true strength could be found not in military might or political authority, but in unwavering faith and moral conviction. His ability to maintain his dignity, his sense of humor, and his unwavering faith while being subjected to unspeakable torture suggested that there were forms of strength that physical force couldn't touch, values that transcended the material world. This profound insight would prove revolutionary not only for Christianity, but for the entire Western understanding of human rights, dignity, and the inherent limitations of political authority. The story of St. Lawrence's martyrdom continues to resonate nearly 17 centuries after his death because it addresses fundamental questions about human nature, suffering, and the search for ultimate meaning that remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome, questions that continue to haunt and inspire us. In an age when we often like to think we've moved beyond the barbarities of the past, Lawrence's example serves as a stark reminder that the capacity for both extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary courage remains a constant feature of the human condition, a potential that lies dormant within each of us. What makes Lawrence's story particularly powerful and enduring is not just the sheer brutality he endured, but more importantly, his extraordinary response to that brutality, his unwavering refusal to be broken by the forces of oppression. In a world where victimhood has become a central category for understanding suffering, a way to define our identities and to seek redress for past wrongs, Lawrence presents the radical alternative of victory through apparent defeat, a triumph of the spirit over the forces of darkness. His refusal to be broken by torture, his ability to maintain his humanity while being treated with inhuman cruelty, and his transformation of his execution into an act of worship challenge our comfortable assumptions about power, weakness, and the very nature of triumph itself. The historical record of Lawrence's martyrdom also raises profound questions about the relationship between faith and reason that continue to perplex and challenge modern observers, pushing us to, so, as we've seen, the story of St. Lawrence isn't just a tale of ancient suffering, but a powerful testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. It's a story about how faith, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, can become a beacon of hope and ultimately transform the very forces that seek to destroy it. Lawrence's unwavering spirit, his courage, and even his humor in the face of death continue to inspire us to examine our own values and ask ourselves what truly matters in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of the human spirit can shine brightly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible story. What aspects of Lawrence's life and death resonated most with you? Do you have any questions or insights you'd like to share? Please leave a comment below and let's get a discussion going. And if you found this exploration of history and faith inspiring, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos. We'll be diving into more stories like this, uncovering the remarkable individuals and events that have shaped our world. Thanks for watching.